Good evening and welcome to the Daily News Roundup. I am Abigail Smythe. Coming up in this evening's newscast, the garbage pileup at several schools possibly making children ill. Nurses Association says government not sufficiently committed to training nurses. Minister of Agriculture urges farmers to focus on improving soil nutrition. Gangster gets life in prison for murder as DPP wins historic appeal. In business, Finance Minister says the country is in a healthy position to endure potential shocks. In the region, more oil discovered in Guyana. On the international scene, world's largest active volcano in Hawaii sending signals of eruption. And in sports, Jamaica Football Federation facing $2 million budget for next year's FIFA Women's World Cup. Now for the news in detail. Concerns have been raised about the pileup of garbage at several schools, possibly making children ill. However, the St. Catherine Public Health Department says it cannot confirm a correlation. Deputy Chief Public Health Inspector for St. Catherine, Denise Douglas, says health inspectors have received reports of a garbage pileup in at least 3 schools and have called the National Solid Waste Management Authority on several occasions to address the matter. The issue was brought to the fore during a recent meeting of the St. Catherine Public Health and Sanitation Committee. The chairman, Sidney Rose, complained that several schools, including Charlemont High, Yuatan High, and Eltham Primary, have been experiencing overflow of garbage for extended periods. Mr. Rose says he received reports that students were becoming ill, vomiting, and experiencing diarrhea, and being told by a medical doctor that it was due to them being in unsanitary spaces. He adds that teachers have started to complain of large numbers of students appearing to be coming down with a bug. Mr. Rose believes not enough attention is being paid to the parish's public health department. He suggests that an increase in the number of public health inspectors would assist in identifying health concerns in schools. President of the Nurses Association of Jamaica, NAJ, Patsy Edwards Henry, says the government is not sufficiently committed to training nurses. Her comments come after Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton's explanation that a shortage of qualified nurses is a contributing factor to the death of several babies at Victoria Jubilee Hospital. Mrs. Edwards Henry, who has been assigned to the Victoria Jubilee Hospital for more than 30 years, says the systemic problem is an easy fix, but nothing is being done to address it. She laments that there are training schools that are closed due to infrastructure issues and adds that the in-service education unit, which is right next door to the Nurses Association, has been condemned for close to a year, and they are the ones who train neonatology nurses. The NAJ president says while it is easy to look overseas for additional nurses to fill the gap, there are other measures that can alleviate the issue. She says the number of assigned nurses has not increased to match the expanded services being provided at public health facilities. She argues that, quote, "Since I have been there, we have introduced a gynecological ward, maternal fetal medicine, we've introduced special clinics, we've added operating theaters, and the same cadre of nurses that existed in 1976 is the same set of nurses that are expected to carry out all these additional services," end quote. She acknowledges that while they did manage to get 1,572 posts under a previous government years ago, she admits that those posts were given to persons who were already in the system and therefore still does not speak to an expansion of the cadre in relationship to the expansion of services. Dr. Tufton revealed that there's a ratio of 1 nurse to at least 7 newborns at the Victoria Jubilee Hospital, and these circumstances may have contributed to the bacterial outbreak which caused the deaths of 12 infants. Mrs. Edwards Henry admits that the nurse-to-patient ratio in Jamaica is, quote, horrendous, because in some hospital units you have 1 nurse with up to 30 patients, end quote. She says while the NAJ is conducting a survey to more accurately determine the nurse nurse to patient ratio, there should be continuing education for nurses in infection control. In the meantime, the opposition People's National Party, PNP, is calling for the immediate resignation of Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton. The call comes following the deaths of 12 babies linked to bacterial outbreaks at the Victoria Jubilee Hospital. They are also calling for a comprehensive probe of the deaths. General Secretary of the PNP, Dr. Dayton Campbell, describes the minister's attitude to the deaths as callous and unacceptable. Dr. Campbell states that, quote, infection control is seminal to the management of neonatal nurseries, and to leave the staff at the hospital without the necessary tools to ensure this infection control is tantamount to a dereliction of duty, end quote.
We're therefore calling for the immediate resignation of the Minister of Health and Wellness, Dr. Tufton. If Dr. Tufton refuses to do the ethical thing and resign, the Prime Minister must relieve him of his duties as Health Minister. There have been too many catastrophes associated with the Ministry of Health. We cannot allow the continued mismanagement and lack of accountability to go on at the Ministry of Health. How many more people, how many more babies should die before something is done to address the woeful condition of our health sector?
The spike in the deaths of newborns has been partly blamed on a staffing crisis at neonatal units. A health ministry review has also attributed the increase to equipment challenges and overcrowding leading into the so-called crop season, where births exceed the general monthly averages. The PNP General Secretary argues that it is not enough for the health minister to merely publicly admit to this tragic loss and stop short by saying a high-profile team has been sent in. He says this approach neither shows accountability to the families of the neonates lost or inspires confidence in the expectant families. According to Health and Wellness Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton, a little over $1 billion has so far been spent on the government's Code Care program. The program, which was first announced by the minister in May 2021, was implemented to reduce the backlog of elective surgeries in public hospitals that was made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Tufton says $80 million was spent to rehabilitate operating theaters, $200 million for public-private engagement, $223 million on equipment, $279 million for nursing mission, $154 million for additional staff hours, $23.5 million for project management, and $59 million on the communications component. Dr. Tufton told the House of Representatives on Tuesday that the program was designed to reduce the wait time for elective surgeries to less than 180 days and to increase the number of surgeries conducted over the same period by at least 80%. The overall target is 2,000 surgeries over 12 months. The minister outlines the 5 components of the Code Care program as such: operating theater rehabilitation, public-private partnership, which facilitates the use of private operating theaters, procurement of surgical equipment and supplies, staffing for increased surgeries and operations, and project management as a special program designed to reduce wait time. Dr. Tufton notes that $200 million was budgeted for the public-private surgical partnership component of the program for the financial year 2022 to 2023. He adds that 3 contracts totaling $23 million each were entered with 3 health facilities in the western end of the island: Montego Bay Hospital and Urology Center, Hospitan, and G West Corporation. He says the ministry was currently negotiating with health facilities on the western end of the island. Dr. Tufton disclosed that each of the expected 1,200 hernia surgeries that are being outsourced under Code Care will cost $270,000 each. Additionally, he expects 400 surgeries for fibroids as well as plastic surgeries, which he explains are corrective surgeries for accident and burn victims, among others. Dr. Tufton adds that the plan for Code Care is subject to adjustments based on the needs and demands. Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, Pernell Charles Jr., is urging farmers to place greater focus on improving soil nutrition. This, he says, contributes to an increase in agricultural production for local consumption and meet export needs. Minister Charles Jr. says the ministry is guiding research for the development and utilization of new blends of fertilizers that are more cost-effective and will enhance crop yield. He states, quote, Ultimately, for Jamaica, we want to achieve food security, which means that we have to increase food production, reduce what we are wasting, and look at the methods and the mechanisms to help farmers do what they do best and to do it in a better way, end quote. On Wednesday, Hypro launched the Diamond R per coat Controlled Release Fertilizer, CRF, which makes it possible to match the supply of nutrients with the nutritional needs of plants throughout the growing season. It is designed to feed plants continuously with maximum nutritional efficiency while reducing nutrient losses, ensuring uniform growth, optimal yield, and superior quality while protecting the environment. Minister Charles says the new product is directly aligned to the ministry's Grow Smart, Eat Smart campaign, which is aimed at expanding the agriculture sector's growth and sustainability. He believes Jamaica will be able to achieve self-sufficiency in food production and supply the Caribbean region. Additionally, the minister has highlighted the need for increased focus on value-added production to ensure less waste. In the meantime, Minister Charles lauds Hypro, saying the entity has distinguished itself as a company that has always strived for excellence in the quality of products that it provides for its customers. He says the fertilizer launch is just another example of the company's commitment to ensuring the farmers are exposed to the best products available to improve their production and profitability. The Crown registered a historic win on Friday with the granting of the first appeal under the Judicature Act. Westmoreland gangster Lindell Powell, who first received a 12-year sentence for murder, has now been sentenced to life in prison. This comes after the Court of Appeal upheld a case from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions that the sentence was unduly lenient. This is the DPP's first use of a law that gives the prosecution a right to appeal sentences. Justice Frank Williams had handed down the ruling Friday morning. The appeal court imposed life sentences for each of the 2 counts of murder on which he was convicted. Powell will have to serve 20 years and 7 months on 1 count and 24 years and 7 months on the second, both at hard labor, before being eligible for parole. Since the sentences will run at the same time, he will have to serve 24 years before being eligible for parole. The former member of the notorious Kings Valley Gang in Westmoreland was sentenced to 12 years in the Hanover Parish Court on December 2021 with a stipulation of 10 years before considerations for parole. He had pleaded guilty to the 2017 murders of Oral McIntosh and Ida Clark, which took place in Westmoreland on separate incidents. However, the Director of Public Prosecution, Paula Llewellyn, who had described the sentence as duly lenient, had taken issue with the parole eligibility period and appealed. The prosecution got the limited right to appeal sentences and acquittals following amendments to the Judicature Act that took effect on November 2021. The DPP had called for the murderer to be sentenced to life imprisonment with eligibility for parole between 20 to 28 years. At the time of his murder conviction, Powell had convictions for 2 firearm offenses and was sentenced in August 2019 to 18 months imprisonment on each count. The DPP also argued that the convict's fixed sentence was inappropriate, especially given his previous conviction. However, attorney-at-law Dion Mailer Barrett, who represented Powell, had asked the court not to disturb the sentence. She argued that the sentencing judge, Justice Bertram Morrison, did not err in principle or in law. A man was shot and injured at a candlelight vigil for ex-soldier Kemar Reed at Hertford in Westmoreland Thursday night. Reports from the police are that shortly after 7 o'clock, men traveling in a white Toyota Axio car from the direction of the Cornwall community opened gunfire at the gathering, sending people scampering for cover. When the shooting subsided, a man was found suffering from what appeared to be gunshot wounds. The injured man was transported to the hospital by residents. He was treated for gunshot wounds to the right elbow and lower left arm and admitted in stable condition. The ex-soldier, otherwise called Dijab, was shot and killed on Wednesday, October 19 by unknown assailants while seated at his bar in Hertford. As of October 18, the parish recorded 124 murders, a 33.3% increase when compared to the corresponding period last year. In the meantime, head of the Westmoreland Police Division, Senior Superintendent Wayne Josephs, is urging parents to closely monitor their children as the number of murders continue to rise. Stakeholders in the parish held a peace march on Thursday in Savannah Lamar to express concerns on the number of murders being committed in the Western Parish. SSP Josephs says he hopes the march has sent a message. The commanding officer notes that a lack of parenting has also contributed to young people participating in criminal activities. 4 people, including a female, were arrested and charged with illegal possession of firearm and ammunition following the seizure of a firearm and several rounds of ammunition on Monday, October 17. They are 20-year-old Shanti Witten of Grand Spend Drive, St. Andrew, 27-year-old Jamar Ingram, a taxi operator of East Street, Kingston, a 17-year-old boy of Last Street, Kingston, and a 16-year-old student of Providence Lane, Kingston 5. Reports from the Hunts Bay Police are that about 10:20 p.m., lawmen intercepted a Nissan AD wagon motorcar on Spanish Town Road, Kingston 11. The vehicle was searched, which resulted in the seizure of a Browning single-action 9mm pistol with a magazine containing 11 9mm rounds of ammunition. The persons were subsequently charged. Their court dates are being finalized. The Manchester police are probing a case of suspected suicide involving an elderly woman in the parish. She has been identified as 68-year-old Winifred Cameron of a New Forest address. The JCF's corporate communications unit confirmed that Cameron's body was seen hanging from a tree in her yard around 6 o'clock Wednesday morning. She was reportedly last seen alive around 9 o'clock Tuesday night. Investigations are ongoing. St. Thomas now has a new fire station. The facility was opened this week during the Jamaica Fire Brigade's Fire and Life Safety Awareness Week under the theme Preserving the Nation Through Life Safety and Fire Prevention. The facility comes with an office space, a small conference room, male and female dormitories, restrooms, an emergency medical services room, a small gym, and an engine bay. The station is one of many to be built in the country's south coast in an effort to improve service and facilitate a quicker response to emergencies in the area. Minister of Local Government and Rural Development Desmond McKenzie says the new fire station in Yala St. Thomas forms part of numerous development plans the government has to improve the lives of citizens of the parish. And in business news, Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark says the country is in a healthy position to endure potential shocks that are on the horizon. Dr. Clark says the country wasted no time in replenishing its financial buffers coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. The finance minister says Jamaica's debt has been brought back to pre-COVID levels and other fiscal buffers are being restored. He adds that the government's strategy is to strengthen economic resilience as a policy directive and that the government will always prioritize improving the country's ability to resist shocks. And also in business news, the cost of output production in the manufacturing industry declined in the month of September. The producer price index for the sector fell by 0.4%. The Statistical Institute of Jamaica says the main contributor to the drop was a 4% decline in the cost of fuel. The decline was, however, tempered by a 3.6% increase in the cost of chemical and chemical products. Fabricated metal products, excluding machinery and equipment, also increased for the month, up by 5.4%. September's producer price index movement brought the point-to-point index for the manufacturing industry up by 18.9%. And in the region, more oil has been discovered in Guyana. ExxonMobil announced oil discoveries at the Sailfin 1 and Yarra 1 wells offshore Guyana. In a statement, the company said it has made more than 30 discoveries on the block since 2015, and it has ramped up offshore development and production at a pace that far exceeds the industry average. President of ExxonMobil upstream company Liam Malone said the company's exploration success and accelerated pace of development in Guyana are a testament to its people, decades of experience, and technology capabilities. And over in Bermuda, the Premier David Burt sacked 2 of his cabinet ministers in a shakeup following his victory in a progressive Labour Party leadership battle against Curtis Dickinson last week. Out are Youth, Culture and Sport Minister Dr. Ernest Peets, who sits in the Senate, and Transport Minister Lawrence Scott, who initially said he planned to run for the PLP's deputy leadership role before ruling out a challenge. Owen Darrell, the Premier's Chief of Staff, was sworn in at Government House on Thursday to be the new Minister of Youth, Culture and Sport. He will also become the government's leader in the 11-member upper house. Meanwhile, Mr. Scott's portfolio has been handed to Wayne Ferbert, whose cabinet office ministerial responsibilities will now fall to Vance Campbell, who also remains as Minister of Tourism. Premier Burt said Mr. Peets and Mr. Scott would continue to work with the government from outside of the cabinet. He also said the changes would reduce the size of the cabinet from 13 members to 12 and cut costs during a time of economic challenge. Bermuda's national debt stands at $3.35 billion. And on the international scene, Hawaii officials are warning residents of the Big Island that the world's largest active volcano, Mauna Loa, is sending signals of eruption. Scientists say an eruption isn't imminent, but they are on alert because of a recent spike in earthquakes at the volcano's summit. Experts say it would take just a few hours for lava to reach homes closest to vents on the volcano, which last erupted in 1984. Hawaii's Civil Defense Agency is holding meetings across the island to educate residents about how to prepare for a possible emergency. They recommend having a go bag with food, identifying a place to stay once they leave home, and making a plan for reuniting with family members. The volcano makes up 51% of the Hawaii island landmass, so a large portion of the island has the potential to be affected by an eruption. The Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, which is part of the U.S. Geological Survey, said Mauna Loa has been in a state of heightened unrest since the middle of last month, when the number of summit earthquakes jumped from 10 to 20 per day to 40 to 50 per day. And in the U.S., Paul Pelosi, the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, was attacked with a hammer at the couple's home in San Francisco by a male assailant early Friday morning. The 82-year-old was hospitalized and is expected to make a full recovery. The U.S. Capitol Police released a statement saying they are assisting the FBI and the San Francisco Police with a joint investigation into the break-in at the residence. A spokesman for Nancy Pelosi, Drew Hamill, said the assailant is in custody and a motive is being investigated. The speaker was in Washington at the time of the attack, and with her being away, there would not have been a security detail at the residence. The assailant entered the Pelosi residence through the back of the house. And in sports, the Jamaica Football Federation, JFF, says it is facing a $2 million budget to prepare the Reggae Girls for next year's FIFA Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. JFF President Michael Ricketts says while his organization has been receiving some amount of funding for the team, they are still in need of a lot more funds as the federation looks to boost team preparations for the tournament, which will run from July 20 to August 20, 2023. He says accumulating funds is one thing, but stressed that responsible fiduciary behavior is equally critical in the process of income generation and expenditure. The Reggae Girls have been drawn in Group F, in which they will face former world champions Brazil, along with France and the winners of the playoff between Chinese Taipei and Papua New Guinea. The Reggae Girls play France on July 23 at Sydney Football Stadium in Australia, then meet either Chinese Taipei, Paraguay or Papua New Guinea in Perth, Australia on July 29. The girls will finish the group stage against Brazil in Melbourne, Australia on August 2. The president says that the group is going to be very challenging for the Jamaicans. Therefore, the JFF will be doing its best to ensure the team is properly prepared for the tournament. And in cricket, assistant coach of the West Indies women Robert Samuels says he is excited about the performances at the 12-day training camp for the region's under-19 players. 22 of the region's best young cricketers were shortlisted to prepare for the world's ICC Women's Under-19 World Cup in South Africa. The Windies women are continuing their preparations and readiness for international assignments as they went through drills and skills at the camp in Antigua. Samuels says the players got a lot out of the camp as they worked on specifics. He says he saw great progress being made. And that's it for the news roundup for today and for this week. I am Abigail Smythe. Have a great weekend and see you next time.